It's a really unsettling question, isn't it? Why do people sometimes just freeze during a crisis? I mean, you'd think if someone was in obvious danger, a crowd would jump in to help, right? But sometimes the complete opposite happens. So today, we're going to dive into the psychology behind this and try to understand why we sometimes just don't help.
Those were the actual, terrifying cries of a 28-year-old woman named Kitty Genovese. It happened back in 1964 in a quiet neighborhood in Queens. And her brutal attack, well, it became this defining moment not just for crime, but for our entire understanding of social psychology.
And this is the number that seared this story into the public's mind: 38. The New York Times reported that 38 respectable, law-abiding citizens heard her screams or saw the attack from their apartments and for over half an hour did absolutely nothing. Just think about that. That one number, 38, it sparked this huge national conversation and kicked off a whole new field of research.
All right, so here's how we're going to break this down. First, we'll look at what happened that night. Then we'll get into the psychology of inaction. After that, we'll hit a big twist in the story of those 38 witnesses. Then we'll cover the decision process to help, and finally, bring it all into the modern day with a digital bystander.
Okay, so let's start at the beginning. This is the event that became this kind of modern parable for big city apathy. So what really happened on that cold night back in 1964?
You see, the attack wasn't just one quick, terrible moment. It happened in stages. It stretched out over about 35 minutes. The first assault happens around 3:15 a.m. The attacker actually gets scared off, but then he comes back. 10 minutes later, he finds her again. And according to the story everyone was told, the first call to the police didn't come in until almost 3:50 a.m. That long timeline, that was the most shocking part. So many people, so much time, and yet it seemed like there was just this wall of silence.
So this whole case left a couple of psychologists, John Darley and Bib Latane, with this huge question. Was it really that 38 people just didn't care? Or, and this is the key, was something else, something way more complex, happening because there were 38 people? And this question led them to two really groundbreaking theories.
And here's the first big idea they came up with: the bystander effect. It's so counterintuitive, right? We're always told there's safety in numbers. But this theory flips that on its head. It suggests there's actually inaction in numbers. The more people who are watching an emergency, the less likely it is that any one of them will actually step up and do something. So what's the engine driving this whole thing? Well, it's something called diffusion of responsibility. Think about it. If you're the only person who sees something bad happen, 100% of the pressure to do something is on you. But what if there are 10 other people standing there? Suddenly, you might only feel about 10% responsible. Your brain starts going, someone else will handle it. Or, I bet someone's already called 911. That responsibility just spreads out. It diffuses across the crowd, and nobody feels like it's their job to act.
So to actually test this, Darley and Latane came up with this really clever experiment. They got a bunch of college students and put them in separate rooms, telling them they were going to discuss personal problems over an intercom system. Now, some were told they were talking with just one other person, others with 2, and some with 5. But here's the twist. It was all a setup. All the other participants were just recordings. The real student was always 100% alone.
And then, during the discussion, one of the pre-recorded voices suddenly pretends to have a life-threatening medical emergency, a really bad seizure. You hear choking sounds, desperate cries for help. Just imagine that. You're sitting there, you hear this through your headphones, and you believe a fellow student is literally dying. What do you do?
Well, the results were just wow. They were stunning. When a participant thought it was just them and the person in distress, 85% of them went to get help. But get this. When they thought they were in a group of 6 people, that number dropped like a rock, all the way down to 31%. Just the idea that other people were listening, even people they couldn't see, was enough to paralyze them.
Okay, so we've established the bystander effect is a real documented psychological thing. But now, here comes a major plot twist. That story that kicked this whole thing off, the story of Kitty Genovese and the 38 witnesses, well, it turns out it wasn't exactly true.
That original New York Times story, with that absolutely shocking headline, it created a powerful, unforgettable narrative. But years later, investigations showed that it was a huge oversimplification. It was sensationalized. The number 38 was probably inflated, and maybe most importantly, the idea that nobody helped, that was just flat out wrong.
The truth is, as it often is, way more complicated. One neighbor actually did shout from his window, and it scared the attacker away, at least for a little while. And there were calls to the police, even if they were delayed or maybe not taken seriously at first.
And then there's this woman, Sophie Ferrer, who did something incredible. She didn't just watch. She ran down into the street, found Kitty, and held her in her arms as she died. Now, this doesn't make the tragedy any less awful, but it totally shatters that simple story of 38 people who just didn't care.
So, if the original story is a bit shaky, what does that mean for the psychology? Well, Latané and Darley went back and refined their ideas. They realized that the decision to help isn't just a simple yes or no switch. It's more like a series of mental hurdles you have to clear one after the other.
And they came up with 5 critical steps. Okay, step 1, you actually have to notice something is happening. Step 2, you have to interpret it as an emergency. Is that yelling a real fight or just kids messing around? Step 3, you have to assume personal responsibility. That's overcoming the diffusion of responsibility we just talked about. 4, you got to know what to do. Do you call the police? Do you intervene? And finally, step 5, you have to actually act on that decision. If you fail at any single one of those steps, the whole process breaks down and no help is given.
And they even tested that very first step, just noticing. In another famous experiment, they had smoke start to fill a room. People who were in the room alone noticed it super fast in like 5 seconds. But when people were in groups, it took them up to 20 seconds. Why? Because they're all looking at each other, right? Nobody wants to be the one to panic or overreact, so this weird social pressure actually makes them slower to even see an obvious danger right in front of them.
Okay, but here's the hopeful part. This effect isn't some unbreakable law of human nature. It can actually be reversed. Research shows that when an emergency is super clear and super dangerous, like a life or death situation, people in groups are often more likely to help. It also helps if the bystanders feel some kind of connection, a shared identity with the victim. Think fans of the same sports team, or if the group itself has a culture of helping, like a group of nurses or firefighters.
So, this all started way back in 1964. But these ideas, man, they are more relevant now than ever. Just think about it. What happens when the crowd of bystanders isn't on a street corner, but in your social media feed?
The online world can be a perfect storm for the bystander effect. For one, it's often really hard to tell if something is a joke or if it's real harassment. And that diffusion of responsibility, it's on a massive scale. It's not 38 people, it's thousands, maybe millions of viewers. Plus, you've got anonymity, which makes it super easy to think your one comment or action doesn't matter. I mean, one study on cyberbullying found that even though 68% of people saw it happening, only 10% actually did anything to intervene.
And all of this brings up a really fascinating legal and cultural question. See, in a lot of countries, they actually have laws, duty to aid or Good Samaritan laws, that basically say it's a crime not to help someone if you can do it safely. But the US and England are actually exceptions to this. And that really shows you this deep cultural split in how we think about our personal responsibility to each other.
So we kind of end up back where we started. The story of Kitty Genovese, it turns out, wasn't this simple tale of 38 monsters. It was complicated. And it revealed this powerful, unconscious social force that can get in the way of our own best instincts. But maybe the antidote is just knowing. Knowing that the bystander effect is real, that diffusion of responsibility is a trap our brains can fall into, that's the first step to fighting it. So it leaves all of us with a really important question, right? Now that we know about this, what are we going to do about it?